Greetings, people of Earth. Welcome back. My name is Jax. No, it's too bright. Sorry, I was gonna try. Today we're talking about how everything in life is a process, including life. This idea is pretty self-evident. I think if you have a little bit of introspection and you're looking at life or looking at whatever you're doing, but everything in life has a beginning, middle, and end. It has parts on either side of that. Like there's a pre-beginning, like before you were born, or before you begin the process, before the beginning. And there's also a moment after the end, like when the process is done, when whatever you're doing is done, when the party is over. And so really there's like 5 parts to anything in life. And I think this is kind of like a neat concept. So this is what we're talking about today. I'm going to try. It is very, very snowy and bright outside. But this kind of idea can be really useful when you want to change something about your life. It can be really useful when you are sort of evaluating how you're doing in life, being a little introspective. Maybe you're thinking of self-improvement. Maybe you're thinking of getting rid of a bad habit. And I think it's a neat concept. It's an important concept. And thus, here we are. So we're going to use a few examples. I think the first example I want to do is just like self-improvement in general. So when you're looking at your life in kind of an overhead view and you're sort of looking at it all from maybe a top-down approach or whatever you want to say, you can identify some really basic things. So obviously there was a time before you existed. There was a time before you were born. Your parents, the people who raised you and everything, decided to, create you, raise you, adopt you, whatever it was. And, that process shapes who you are. It affects your life in a lot of profound ways. Whether you are a product of a single parent or 2 parents or your grandparents or aunts and uncles, related people, whether you were adopted, those sort of circumstances set you up, either good or bad. Sometimes you have 2 parents and they're not good parents. Sometimes you have a grandmother who absolutely, takes you under her wing and, makes you the amazing person you are. But regardless of it, there's the pre-you, before you appear. And then there's your beginning, your birth, your raising, your learning things, your adolescence. You can think of all of these moments in life as your beginning, where you're starting to learn your language, you're learning social skills, you're learning what you like and you don't like. Maybe you hate avocado, maybe you love mushrooms, maybe, I don't know. And so your beginning stage of anything is the learning, the acquisition, the processing. You might be starting to figure out where you're going, what you want to do, that kind of thing. I think it's also important to note here that no matter what stage you feel you're in life, in a skill, in whatever we're talking about as a process, it's really important to appreciate each one, because you will always look back on the process and think, oh, it was so cool when I was learning this, or man, that was a difficult childhood, or, and the one thing in life that is kind of universal to humans is that the process is a one-way street. There are moments where we take a step back, or we lose a skill, or, we get rusty at something. Circumstances might happen in the middle stage that sort of knock you back to the stage before, but it's still, the process is moving forward. You can't go back in time. You can't erase what has happened. So it's always a forward movement. Even though sometimes you feel like you're moving backwards, you're still progressing no matter what. And this can be really hard when you're in your like middle stage, midlife crisis or something. And you're like, oh man, I wish I did it differently. I wish I did it. But you can't think like that. You just have to say, okay, I did it that way. What am I going to do in the future? Because you're always moving forward. And so, that's the beginning stage of a process. You're learning piano, you're learning how to, change your career, figure out a career, whatever. And then you get to the middle stage, and this is like young adulthood all the way until sort of your retirement age, 60, 65, something like that, if you're lucky to live that long, if you're fortunate to have the health and everything. This is that middle stage where you're existing, ideally, this is like you know how to play the piano, you know how to learn the language, you know how to do whatever, and you're doing it. It's the active process of it. And we tend to make a really big deal of this whole stage, the middle stage of anything, learning a new skill, whatever it is. And I don't know why we sort of put like a lot of importance on this middle stage, like midlife, working, adulthood, raising a family, the actual, you're somewhat competent in a skill or whatever process that you are adopting. I'm using life as like the main example, but this can be described anything. And so that whole like process of the middle stage, it gets romanticized, it gets worked on. Typically, this is when you are, your peers or whatever you're doing is like the vast majority of society. So I think like, a vast majority of people aged 25 to 60, that makes up the majority of our population in terms of like demographics. And it's kind of just like, you are who you are. Hopefully you have figured out enough to kind of know who you are and what you're doing, and you're just doing it. Like it's the active process of the thing. If you're learning a skill or something, it's doing the skill and feeling confident in it. You're always hopefully growing and learning, but the middle stage is this of the process is always, it's sort of the realized thing. The beginning is where you're figuring out what you're doing, how you're doing it. The middle is where you're doing it. And then you have the end stage, and the end stage in life typically is sort of the you can think of it as a decline into death, but I don't like to think of it that way. I like to think of it as sort of the golden years, or it's when you've kind of mastered the skill and you feel really competent about it, and you sort of you can be introspective and you can look back on the first two stages and go, oh, that was really fun. If I had my time differently, maybe I would have done this or this, but I play piano well, I do this, or whatever the process is, if it's a language, if it's life, whatever. You're pretty introspective at this point. Hopefully you are able to help someone else in that process. You're the fun grandpa, you're the cool grandma. Maybe you are starting to teach that skill. If the process is piano, maybe you teach piano, maybe you're inspiring people, maybe you're going out and playing concerts or whatever. But the end stage is sort of the completion of everything. It is I don't like to think of it as like the sum total of everything you've been working towards, because every stage of the process is equally as important. Nothing should be put above the others. Your birth wasn't more important than your death. Your middle stage of midlife and raising the kids and everything isn't more important than figuring out it as a young adult, or as retirement, or, getting to explore the things you want to do when you want to do them. And so that end stage can be a lot of things for people. It tends to be the stage where, regret and introspection come in. You might say, I wish I'd done it this way. Maybe you look back and you're super positive about it. You're like, I'm really glad it all, I was lucky. It turned out pretty well in life. Or you'll have a mixed bag, which is probably the most common thing. I don't think a lot of people look back and go, I did everything right. Oh my gosh. And they hopefully don't look back and go, oh my gosh, I did everything wrong. I was, but it's a process, and you have to appreciate that. And then the final stage is the post. You're not there, and you personally don't really have to care about this point because you're not here. Wherever you believe that you go after, if you believe that, or if you think it's just that's it. It's who you're remembered by. It's the impact you had, your legacy, whatever. I don't tend to put a lot of perspective on this, because in my belief, like I'm doing something else. Like at that point, I believe like my energy and where I go is different. And so for me, that end stage is sort of irrelevant. I don't really care about having a lasting legacy. I don't particularly think about it a lot. Like, what will it be like when I'm gone? I'm for the moment, I'm for where I am here. I can appreciate before I was born, and I can appreciate, after I'm gone. But they're all theoretical. I wasn't there for the time before I was born, and I won't be there for the time that I'm gone. But it's nonetheless a part of the whole process. And just like I think it's either an Egyptian or a indigenous Central American belief about you die twice. The first time when you actually go, and the second time when the last person speaks your name. And so you can think of it that way, the last person who speaks your name or your legacy. Maybe you have grandkids, maybe you have younger friends who carry on doing what, you're involved in. The skill is done. You've hung up the thing, you've retired, getting back to just the process. So I don't know. I think it's kind of neat to look at this whole idea of like life is a process, the world is a process, any skill you undertake is a process. Tonight I'm going to learn how to make baked potato soup, and that will be a process. There existed a time before I knew what baked potato soup was. And then there was a beginning where I found out where it was and I said, oh, I want to make it. And now I'm kind of in the mid stage where I have all the ingredients, I have the time, family are coming to visit. And so I'm going to be, soon I will be in the middle of the process where I'm making the soup. I'm going to be doing it and learning all the ins and outs of how to make it work, how to make it nice, tasty, all of these things. And then I'll have the post moment or the end stage where I can say, oh, I wonder how that went. And, what would I do differently if I did it again? And I can look back on it. I can hear other people's feedback. And then, then it's gone. We're in the post stage where, maybe I'll try and start the process again and repeat it, because the process can always be repeated. But that's kind of how I think of it. I think of it as just this moving process of going through A to B and then B to C and all the way to Z. And then, that's how it works. So I don't know. This is just like my thought process. Maybe this is just like a ridiculous ramble, but if you're still listening, I hope it was interesting. I hope that you found it somewhat thought-provoking. I guess that's what I'm trying to do today. Just have a little thought-provoking idea of how I see life and how I sort of engage in it. I think it's a pretty linear way of seeing it. I'm sure other people see it in a non-linear way where, it's a zigzag process and you're going back and forth and you're going upside down and you're flipping the whole thing up and you're changing it around. But just from my perspective and how I look at life and how I look at, learning anything, changing anything, growing, developing, it's a process in my head anyway. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening. Wish me luck on the baked potato soup. I hope it's going to be great. If you're interested, I just Googled and I clicked the second link on Google on the recipe. So give it a shot. Start the process. See how it goes. And as always, guys, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you tomorrow.